Do you mind being recorded by AI?
No.
Okay.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Lunch and Learn on how ready are business owners for business succession and transition. My name is Lisa Taylor. I'm the Wisconsin Rural Entrepreneurial Venture Program lead with the University of Wisconsin Division of Extension. Our, our Wisconsin Rev program assists rural communities with entrepreneur-led economic development. I'm joined by a couple of colleagues today. We have Todd Barman, who will be helping with the Q&A portion of our webinar. He works with and through local extension educators to build community capacity to tackle downtown issues and opportunities, including business and storefront succession. We also have Brandon Hofstad joining us. He is our Community Economic Development Program Manager with UW-Madison Extension, managing our technology today. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation and the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Today's webinar is made possible in part by grants from WEDC in support of the Rural Wisconsin Entrepreneurship Initiative and from the U.S. EDA in support of the EDA University Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Just a couple housekeeping items today. Today's meeting is being recorded and the final video will be posted on our website. This webinar does have a closed captioning option if needed. You can find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. As a friendly reminder, please make sure to keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to drop your questions or comments into the chat. Todd will be monitoring the chat for us today, and our speaker, Michael, may answer your questions as we go along, but if not, he will address them at the end of the presentation. And in just a moment, I will turn this presentation over to Michael. Today's webinar will discuss the importance of business succession and transition planning. And we'll share findings from a recent survey of small businesses in Minnesota that explored business owner awareness, attitudes, aspirations, and preparedness for transferring their business when the time comes. Our guest presenter today is Michael Darger, who is an extension specialist and community economics director with the University of Minnesota Extension. Michael manages UMN Extension's BRE program, which is the Business Retention and Expansion Program. His current education and research interest is business succession and transition. He is researching business owners' understanding, attitudes, and preparation for succession and transition. A related interest is the conversion of businesses to employee-owned businesses, such as ESOPs, co-ops, or employee ownership trusts. He also teaches BRE courses to economic development audiences and provides BRE consulting and applied research for Minnesota communities. He has served on the boards of economic and community development organizations and edited a book entitled Business Retention and Expansion, A Practical Approach to Economic Development. He also serves on the board of the Northeast Investment Co-op in Minneapolis. And now I will turn the webinar over to Michael.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. All right, that should be on screen. And if not, let me know, Todd. But yeah, it's good to be back here with the University of Wisconsin webinar series. Brandon's tapped me 3 times in the last year and a half. So thanks for that. And we'll get going. So I'm happy to share about our research at University of Minnesota Extension on this topic. Traditionally, you heard it called business succession planning. I think that's incomplete because I believe that business succession planning is largely about leadership and management, whereas the transition brings in legal issues, kind of ownership issues. So I prefer business succession and transition, or BST for short. So if you hear me saying BST, business succession and transition, both things need to happen for a business to transfer to new owners and leadership. So my goals for this session are to talk a little bit about why are we talking about this? Does it matter? To share our research results that Lisa was just alluding to, share some of our resources at the end. We've been at this for about 10 years, and I'm the 4th extension professional in our community economics team to take a swing at this. So it's kind of a interesting and somewhat challenging topic to cover because it covers a lot of ground. And it tends to be something that people sometimes don't want to talk about. It's kind of a confidential thing, right? So that's a thing too. And so I'll use a few interactive Zoom polls thanks to Todd, and we'll actually have one of them as an open chat at the end. And we'll probably save most of the discussion for the end unless I'm doing well on time and I see your chat come in. Otherwise, feel free to chat in those questions anytime you feel like it, and we'll try to get to them at the end, if not before. And so most of this presentation is about what we call the Minnesota Business Succession and Transition Study. Now, like I said, I've done some earlier webinars about both BRE and BST, and the first BST session was in November of 2022. So I'm going to call that BST 1.0, and I think Brandon's going to drop that link into the chat. Please don't leave now. That's recorded. You don't have to leave this, but soon there will be 2 BST sessions on that. But anyway, that's there, and so that covers kind of a broader treatment of this topic, if you will. So like I said, we've been at this for 10 years at the University of Minnesota. It kind of was an offshoot of our business retention and expansion efforts, which goes back over 3 decades. But getting owners of small businesses, owners and leaders, that is, to transfer their operations before it's too late, it became apparent that was a thing. And the first concern, not surprisingly, was about people like me, baby boomers, who didn't get the memo that you need to have an exit plan. And so if they didn't have an exit plan, sometimes they'd exit before they had transferred the business. So Liz Templin started the program. She retired a few years ago. She did some nice work. Then a couple of other of our extension educators on a community economics team, Jennifer Hawkins and John Bennett, who some of you may know, carried on the research and the development. They developed a class for business owners. Liz had done a research project that I'll show you in a bit. And then I've taken over and I've created a new research project and a YouTube channel. And I tried to teach on this topic, but that's a little bit tough to get business owners to show up for a Zoom and Canvas-based class. So we're learning as we go. But our aspirations are like we see in the images here. We want to keep businesses open. We're especially talking about small businesses in small communities. And it could look like the image on the left, but more and more so, we'd like to see the image be as inclusive as possible, such as the image on the right. So why is this important? The Gallup organization has done tracking of American institutions and Americans' faith or lack of faith or confidence in these institutions. So they use the word confidence. So you see here, among American institutions, and they're calling small businesses an institution. Only the military and small businesses have tracked in supermajority that Americans across political divides and all sorts of other divides still believe in our military and our small businesses. That's kind of an unfortunate statement about the rest of our American institutions, but suffice it to say that small businesses still matter and are highly regarded from the majority. Hopefully that will stay true, and hopefully some of those other institutions will rise. But you know the state of our country right now. So this is this interesting longitudinal data amongst other reasons why small businesses are important. So this data source is from Project Equity, and they're out of the California Bay Area, and they have tracked this whole so-called silver tsunami of baby boomers. And this is not just about baby boomers. We're tracking businesses that are owned by people who are 55 plus. And so that would now include the front edge of the, the X generation. So the generation that's right after baby boomers. So like we've got a pretty cool version of this in Minnesota, but I'm gonna leave the PowerPoint and I will go to Project Equity and I'm gonna scroll down. I'll expand the box. But if you go to this website, they show pretty much every state. So we'll get this over here and we'll just click on Wisconsin. So Wisconsin is, they're saying 51% of people, owners in business in Wisconsin are 55 plus. Minnesota, the current estimates is about half, 49%. So you can go to any state pretty much and see, and the darker the color, the more they're aging. In Minnesota, we can drill down by county, but you know, that's basically 3 million businesses and this is using federal data. So I'll show another slide in a minute, but that's a nice resource out there that allows you to kind of drill down a little bit. So back to the, sorry, I gotta move the dashboard. It's in my way. Here we go. All right, back to my PowerPoint. Okay. All right. So we did an article that I'll show you in a bit, but in the preparation for the article, we found the federal data shows that Minnesota businesses are aging, the owners are aging, and they're getting older. So 5 years ago, before the pandemic, about 50% of owners were at the 55 plus, you know, 31% in that 55 to 64, and then 19% at 65 and older. And now it's, those two combined segments are at 53%. So, you know, it's a thing. So just like our presidential candidates, business owners getting older. So what do we do about it? And that's just the Minnesota view. So moving on to the research. Liz Templin, like I said, did a research project about 7 years ago. It was published in the Community Development Journal by the Community Development Society. And we still have that research on our website. So at that link that you see right there, z.umn.edu/business succession, all of my stuff, everything I'm going to show you is at that website in various places. So that's a nice link. But she found that the top barriers to these owners and leaders not moving forward and transferring were varied. So the amount of time it was perceived to take, and it's true that it takes time to do this kind of preparation. The cost involved was can sometimes be a barrier. There's some consultants that are not affordable to businesses, let's say below 2 million or 2.5 million in revenues. Confidentiality, like I already said, none of your business, right? But is it none of my business? If I'm in that town and I'm a customer of yours, or I'm a vendor, or, you know, people I know work for you, or, you know, I'm on the EDA, whatever, and I know what you contribute in terms of fiscal impact and all those other types of things. So the lack of awareness, not getting the memo about the value of planning and preparation. So, you know, like General Dwight D. Eisenhower said, plans are nothing, planning is everything. So it's a process, right? And you're never done, but if you never begin, you're probably not going to be successful. So she also found that people were either not interested or not ready to pass it on. You know, I don't know what that means, if they think they're going to get out of here like this instead of like this, but it's a thing. And then the whole issue of what it's worth. So that's a key thing that we measured in our new research of whether they're getting outside professionals to help them with valuation. They don't know where to begin, and this is one of those things that doesn't get into the upper right quadrant of Stephen Covey's, you know, diagram, where it has to be both important and urgent to spur action. So then there's the whole issue of there's a person involved here. It's not just a business. So separating the personal readiness from the business readiness. So then jump forward to last year, we decided to initiate a second phase of research And this is where we got a random scientific sample of basically almost all the NAICS codes of businesses. We excluded agricultural producers and we excluded for-profit education firms. Otherwise, if a business was in the frame of 5 to 500 employees and not in one of those NAICS codes, it was possible to be selected. So we bought 3,000 contacts from Data Axle, which is a prominent data firm. And we had all 87 of the counties in that initial data set had at least one or more businesses. And then when we drilled down further and we did a 4-wave Dillman informed US mail paper survey with postcards, we got most of the counties had at least one respondent, and we received 341 actual responses. Unfortunately, 60 or so of those were not eligible, but they took the time to respond or call me because they thought this was a relevant and important topic. And so we got the message. We could tell these business owners cared. So we got the statistical significance because of the scientific nature and because of our selection procedures. And we got almost 300 valid responses. So, and interestingly, the vast majority are family owned, but of those, pretty much only first or second generation family businesses. So this is all available at this sub website with the Z link. So, and we got everything there: our methods, our literature review, the actual survey instrument, you name it, the data dashboards. There's about 4 or 5 articles. So there's a lot there. And we'd love to see some other states here. Like I see Michael Patrick from New Mexico and people from all over. So if anyone wants to replicate or cooperate, we'd love to talk to you. So our office looked like this about 15 months ago. Pushed out a lot of paper, including $2 bills, pictures of Thomas Jefferson, and somehow it worked. Old school, big push. Because we didn't know these people. So we didn't really want to go with any kind of electronically mediated, just seemed like a high quality US mail based survey would get through, and it seemed to work. So first Zoom poll. So I'll ask Todd to pull up the Zoom poll. If you go ahead and take a look at that. And all right, most of you have filled it out. Maybe 10 more seconds. You're not going to be graded here, but thanks for most of you participating.
All right. Would you like me to end it now then, Michael?
Sure.
All right. And I will share the results.
Okay, very good. This is it's pretty close to what we saw from the actual business owners. So you can stop sharing that. And, the trusted advisors and other business owners did score high with this is an actual mirror image of the question we asked. So you can see here that 71% of the actual business owners in all 286, I think, answered this question. 71% did consult with their trusted advisors, which makes sense, right? And the vast majority, well, a large majority of them consulted with other business owners. On the other hand, those of us who work for nonprofit or educational entities, such as the extension people here, or government entities, not nearly as much. And then other had a whole bunch of answers that we won't go there. But yeah, thanks for participating in that. And so you were pretty accurate in your response there if you were trying to guess what the businesses said. So we asked this in 2 different ways. One was that the way you just saw, which was a kind of large categorical question. And then we also had a more of a drill down question. And you can see here, and we left out some categories, like we did not have business brokers here. That was probably a mistake. But you can see that accountants and other business owners and attorneys, well, actually, only the top two got into the majority of the business owners. Attorneys were close, but then spouses were almost a third, and personal financial planners, and then it drops off from there. So we actually had some things like websites, other ways of getting information. Small business development centers. I don't know if there's any SBDC people here that they got 13%. So, and then but exit planners, I've got a bunch of videos from exit planners, and exit planners is kind of a rising category of business advisor, and they didn't even break into the double figures. And then, not surprisingly, I suppose, as those of us extension educators and the like, we didn't even make 1%. So I think that's like 2 owners said that they might think about us or go to us for information. So not a surprise, but in Minnesota, we don't do any direct to business programming for the most part. We don't do technical assistance or business consulting. The SBDC is not part of our, that's a separate part of the state agency and all that. So, but we just want to kind of get a baseline for some of these places where business owners turn. So we actually created a data dashboard on this topic. And, but first of all, before I go there, I just want to ask if, is there anything that, surprises anyone here? And I'm not sure I can see the chat right now. I'm gonna just, if anyone has something, they can chat it in. And
I'll read it off for you, Michael,
Okay.
if you can't see it. But right now, nothing is coming in through the chat.
Okay, so it's not a surprise. That's good. All right, I'll go back to sharing. Okay, so we did create several data dashboards. I didn't even know what these were a year ago, and now I have 5 of them related to this project. So you can interrogate the data yourself on our website. And so this one allows you to see, we have a series of questions that are embedded in this dashboard. So at the top, you see we have 2 questions about the readiness on a 1 to 6 scale, about you, the person, and about the business. Those are separate, but related things. So on a 6-point scale, they're right about at the midpoint on average. On personal readiness, 3.58, and business readiness, 3.62. So on a 1 to 6 scale, that's just a very tiny smidge above the midpoint. And you can see where that question 14 about which trusted, which business advisors or sources of information they were consulting. And then a couple of other questions about whether you had a team and that big categorical question. So what I wanted to show you, I'm going to leave that. I'm going to go right to the data dashboard. So let's see. This is on our website. So here's the dashboard itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can interrogate. So let's say we wanted to this is the overall data set. I'm going to go to just the Twin Cities metropolitan area and the SBDC that serves it. So it's their map of the Twin Cities. It's not the official map according to the census or anything like that. This is what the Twin Cities SBDC, their map, and so you can see the maps down lower left, but you can see what the Twin Cities. So the difference here is that the personal financial planners came in, that they flip-flopped with the spouses in importance. Otherwise, it's the same pecking order, and 145 responses. But if you wanted to say, let's go to a place another place that's adjacent to Wisconsin, but it's on the Minnesota side. So southeast. We're not looking for South Dakota. We're looking for Wisconsin. So a place that's a part of Wisconsin and the driftless region that we share with Wisconsin, southeast Minnesota, and whatever that, southwest Wisconsin. So you can see of the 24 businesses who answered that question, you know, the spouses and the personal financials were tied, personal financial planners were tied. Otherwise, in this case, the other business owners was the most important, most consulted resource above both the accountants and the attorneys. So you can, you know, or you could do something like, I'll hit the whole region for where they are. And then let's say people, let's go into this personal readiness. And let's just choose the people who think that they're ready. Let's say that's a 5 or a 6. So pick those. So the people who rated themselves a 5 or 6 was only 96 across the whole state. But then you can see these people who think they're highly prepared as humans, this is personal readiness. They use their accountant, other business owners, attorney, spouse. It's the same pecking order. So you can just interrogate the data. That in this case, they felt personally ready a great deal, but their business's readiness was lower than the overall average. So for what it's worth, you can play with the data. And we've got 5 of these things, and thanks to Joshua and Ashley and Caleb helped me with this, because I don't know how to do these things. But that, you know, there's a whole bunch of those on our website. And now I'll go back to the slides. So we also have articles for those of you who like to consume information in narrative form. Here's a couple examples of articles that we have posted to that research website. So the first article on top is with our state agency, our Department of Employment and Economic Development. And so what I wanted to say here, so you see the Minnesota Society of CPAs. So last year, I was doing a workshop on this BST topic, and there was a CPA in the audience who also was a small business development center consultant. We were in the Brainerd region. So I'd run into Pam and some other BST programs along the way. And so she saw all the different partners that we'd worked with and Liz Templin's research. And the one, probably the only group in Minnesota that wasn't included was, guess who? Accountants. And you already saw the data that accountants are the single most important resource that business owners in Minnesota look to. That's probably true in Wisconsin. I'm guessing it's true in New Mexico or any other states that are here, or Canadian provinces. I don't know who else here regionally, but she says, okay, you say accountants are important, and your research and the literature confirms that, and yet I don't see accountants on your list of groups that you engage with. And so an engagement's one of the things I'm evaluated on, people in our team for our promotion process. I'm like, okay, how do I engage with CPAs? So I reached out to the CPA societies. I didn't get anywhere, email from some strange guy. And so I actually saw one of our major CPA firms at a conference last November. And I went up to them and said, can you get me connected with your association? And they did. And so now I've published a couple, 3 articles on their website, and I'm going to go to their tax conference in November. Why the tax conference? Well, it's not because I know about taxes, but, you know, we're looking a little bit at the psychology and the preparedness, right? So CPAs are in the space of helping the businesses, if they're a business accountant, or possibly with their personal taxes and the personal accounting and tax planning. So we've gained some engagement with that audience. It's not an audience or a group of professionals that Minnesota Extension, quite frankly, had ever engaged with that I remember, and I've been here for 25 years. So that's something that emerged out of this research and through our programming is that, you know, as you can see, the trusted business advisors are a key part of this ecosystem. All right, time for another poll. All right, let's get a few more people. 5 more seconds. Okay, you want to close that, Todd?
I'm gonna end the poll. And I'm sharing results.
Very good. Everyone here gets an A+. Because my source for what I regard to be the right answer is number 2. And so even though those accountants or those attorneys or those other business owners, or pick any one of those categories that was on that you know, that were seen pretty high in the echelon. What Liz Templin found in her research, and this was with rural communities in North Dakota and Minnesota, and then they did a survey of highly rural places and businesses that had successfully transferred. So they looked back. In their case, they were studying successive succession. And so they looked at companies that had been in business for 3 years post-transition, so with new owners and leaders. And what they found was those rural businesses typically had 3 to 5 advisors, and the average was close to 4. So even though an accountant or attorney or a personal financial planner might be really outstanding, really knowledgeable, they're not sufficient in general. This is not a time for either a for sale by owner or your favorite advisor and that's it. This is the time for a team, and they don't have to be at the same time, and they don't have to be the same types of advisors. Every business is different. So, but you typically need a team. This is not a FISBO moment, and it's not a moment for being a lone ranger. It's a time for getting a team to help you. So, and that probably applies in urban and suburban situations, but Liz was only looking at rural businesses in her research, so that I'll just issue that caveat. All right, so we said it's a team thing, and what did we find in my research? We found that it does indeed take a village. Now, my research assistants, a couple of them were statistics majors, and they helped us take a look. Now, this is ordinal data, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's the data that we predicated this analysis on was ordinal. Ordinal data is a little bit special, but with almost 300 observations, we were confident that we can figure out, we're learning some things here. So what we found out was that the accountant added, so if you look at the business readiness for success and the increase in their readiness as we add these 3 key advisors, we found that the accountant added 0.4 on a 6-point scale on average. The attorney added 0.43, and the spouse/partner, at least remember to not just use the word spouse, life partner, added over 5, 0.56. If you add them together, that's 1.39. And so the readiness of the business on a statistically significant basis went from a 3.22 intercept. So that's below the midpoint on a how ready am I on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 basis. So they got to like a 4.3-ish level, 4.3, 4.4, which is a lot more ready than 3.2. And that's with, again, the incremental value of each of these types of advisors. So each advisor is important, but none of them is sufficient. It does take an ecosystem. It does take a village. And these advisors may or may not be from your actual village or your municipality. But you need some smart people to help you. And it's not just about smarts, it's also about emotional intelligence, right? This goes not just into technical affairs, logical things, it goes into emotional things. And that's a key point, right? This is matters of the head and matters of the heart, because there's a lot of identity, a lot of meaning, a lot of things that get a business owner out of the bed in the morning, right? And so taking that away, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be like, today I'm the owner and leader, and I attribute much of my identity and status to that, and the next day I'm nothing. It doesn't. There's all sorts of ways of transitioning and making it a gradual process. Okay, another Zoom poll. So pretend you're a business owner here, and Todd, you can fire up that Zoom poll. Okay, about 2/3. I know this is a little bit more difficult, but give it your best shot.
All right. Oh, still a few more trickling in.
Yeah, let's go another 20 seconds. Can we get to 90% completion? All right, close, 86.
Showing 100% have answered it.
Oh, okay, mine only shows 86%. Okay, close it. Okay, very interesting. And so shades of gray here, shades of blue. I see that the #1 response and was maximizing my personal financial situation. And closely behind that was retaining good jobs and keeping the business in the community. Very interesting. Okay, so this is a kind of a mashup question. Zoom polling has some limited ability. In fact, this was kind of a weaker version of either of our questions. But what we did, folks, was we asked 2 different questions. So if you look at the survey and this actual survey instruments on our website, plus a summary of it with the data on top of it, but you can actually see our survey design. So question 11 asked people to, how important, when planning for succession and transition, how important are these factors to you? So that's a Likert scale. That's a 1 through 6 scale. Then the immediate following question was, which of the 3 factors below are the most important to you? Rank first, second, or third. So we have a rating question first, and then we have a ranking question second. And we got different responses based on how we asked the question. And so we published some articles about that, but here I'm going to show you the results of the rating question. And this chart is available in that DEED article, which you can find under the articles on our website. So, the dark blue color indicates an answer of 5 or 6. So let's call that an important factor. And then the mid blue is somewhat important. So what we see here is the biggest thing was the business's financial success after the transition. I don't think anyone picked that in our group here today. Retaining good jobs took it second place. Again, this is on the rating. So the mean of 5.2 on the first and a mean of 5.1 on the second with the keeping good jobs is when you look at their wealth, which is the 4th thing here, maximizing my personal financial situation, the mean is 4.7, still pretty strong, right? But it's a 0.5 point below and almost 0.5 point below the top 2 things here. So that's on a rating scale, like just kind of in an abstract, how important are these things? We really want to think at what people care about. So let's look at what happened when we asked them about to rank them. So here, and again, this is in that article, but here if you look at the average ranking, the mean, right? That's in the far column on the right. Then the lowest score, which would be the strongest ranking thing on averaging their first, second, and third choice. So maximizing my personal financial situation, my wealth, it was a little bit ahead of business's financial success by 1/10 of a point. But only 136 owners answered that, whereas the response on business's financial success was 176. I think we could call that a dead heat. depending on how you want to answer that. But you see the wealth rises up here, but it does not really surpass that the health of the business, the financial health of the business. And then we see they still get a fair amount of value to keeping those good jobs at a 2.2 and keeping the business in the family. That only mattered to the people who, on a separate question, asked about, like the ones who said that they are a family business. Obviously, those are the ones who said that it was important to keep the, predictably, those are the ones who said it was important to keep they had the high value for keeping the business in the family. But most businesses didn't worry about that as much. And keeping the business in the community, that got a pretty high value. So I think there's some hopeful data here for those of you who are economic developers. If a business owner just cares mostly about their wealth, they're going to be less interested in these other things. But if they care about other things than their wealth, so those are some of the findings I think will be encouraging. So we have two dashboards here. I won't go into them. One dashboard allows you to look at their values and compare it by NAICS code, by industry code. And another one allows you to kind of compare it to track it by their which intended transfer method they're going to use. So if they wanted to do a strategic buyer or a employee ownership trust, or one of the we measured 10 different possible transfer models. But what do you think was the category of businesses that most had the highest score for being concerned about their personal financial situation? And so I can't show you the NAICS codes, but it was the health and social services sector. So we didn't probably have I don't think we probably had any MDs in here, because most medical doctors in Minnesota no longer in private practice. They generally work for, Mayo or Allina, one of our big medical systems, Fairview. But we did have a lot of chiropractors, dentists, and some of the other health occupations. So they had the most concern on average for maximizing their wealth. So you can play with that dashboard, and you can't identify any businesses because we kept it safe, but you can penetrate the data a little bit there. All right, so as far as their preparation, we got some good news and bad news. This is a little bit hard to understand, but we asked them about a series of questions about preparedness activities for BST, and we found that almost 80% of them had not created or updated a written plan. And I would argue that if you don't have a written BST plan, you don't have a plan. Or at least you don't have a plan that anyone else can use. If it's between your ears, that's not really a usable plan for any. So as long as you're good, you got the plan. But if something happens to you, there's nothing there. So that's some bad news. And a little bit less bad is that over 2/3 of them had not done anything to increase the value of their business. And that's important if they have a certain price or wealth maximization in mind. So let's go to the good news. The good news is that they're talking about it. Over 80% were talking about it inside their families, and the super majority were talking about it inside the business. And again, this is almost 300 business owners. Some of them, about 1/3, had actually gone out to the market and got a formal business valuation. And so those are, the business valuation experts is who you're looking for there. Okay, I think it's time for another poll, keeping this interactive. Here you go. Okay, I think 5 seconds. You can end that, Todd. Okay, well, this one is not from my survey results. It's from our literature review, or yeah, it's from our literature review and from my participation in the employee ownership kind of a community here in Minnesota. And there's at least one of my colleagues there, Charbreeze, is on the line. So people who are trying to encourage shared ownership, specifically through employee ownership. So we did measure intentionality, and we found very little awareness and very little intention of sharing or selling the business beyond the, let's call them the traditional pathways. So whether employee stock ownership plans or employee ownership trust, which is a brand new thing, and there's one in Minnesota at least, and then there's worker-owned cooperatives. So those basically didn't like register on the radar too much. So that's an opportunity. But what the literature shows is that literature shows that companies and employees tend to do better when they have a stake in the firm, a financial stake. So there's people at the Beister Institute and the Rutgers University. They've studied this for years. There's a journal about employee ownership. So they find higher performance of the company and of the employees, and employees tend to create, accumulate more wealth through their ownership stake. So, and they did better during the pandemic, slower to lay off and slower to hire. So it's a little bit more of a, it kind of makes sense from a common sense perspective that when you own something, you tend to care more about it, maybe take care of it better. So that, it was a little discouraging to see what we found in our survey results in terms of awareness and intentionality, but that's an educational, there's a, I think, an opportunity there. And related to that, I think I said this a year and a half ago, but I have two hypotheses as the business retention and expansion guy here, that I think employee ownership or other forms of shared ownership, to be more broad, is the most likely form of transition to keep a business local. I think much more so than, say, private equity or selling to a strategic buyer, for instance, two that really come to the top of mind. And then I believe that employee ownership and other forms of shared ownership are not at the level they could be if there's greater awareness, one, and more capacity to help businesses think in these non-traditional ways. I'll give you an example. We have a class for business owners. And a couple of years ago, there was an IT owner in the class from rural Minnesota, and he was thinking strategic buyer. Pretty logical thing. Strategic buyers are associated with maybe the highest price point, maybe or maybe not the highest net proceeds from your sale. But having taken the class, he still was interested in strategic buyers, but he was thinking about worker-owned cooperatives as an example. So by being exposed, to a different concept, gave him something to think about. So, but there's probably not any kind of best model or anything like that for shared ownership. I'm just saying that employee ownership is something's out there. So we have, like I said, we measured several transfer routes. And so there's an article you can find on the website about our analysis, and it's kind of complicated, but we analyzed their intentions and their awareness of these two issues. And here's the results. We found that the owners were most aware of transfers to family, business, strategic buyers, their existing partners, third party or strangers, type of buyers, and management buyouts. They were quite unaware, as I said, of the three employee ownership options that we measured. And parallel form, their intentions, the only thing that were above the midpoint on that 6-point scale, strategic buyers was easily the most popular route. So they got a 4 on that 6-point scale for, if it's like it's question 21 or something. And family got a 3.6 for those who were interested. Otherwise, all the options were below the midpoint in terms of their intention. And the owners were more likely to liquidate than sell to employees in general. ESOPs and liquidating the company were kind of about the same. And we've had ESOPs here. Minnesota's a leading ESOP state for the last 30 years or so. So my most recent article was published on EIX, which is at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, but kind of spanning the border between business retention and entrepreneurship is this thing we call business succession and transition. So my article there has some of my research, but also has some practical tips for how business owners can navigate this. And so kind of a nice little publication, and they published it a month ago, and I've had 3,000 hits. So that's given me some hope, but there's a business succession article on that publication that's had 2.9 million views. So got a ways to go. So this won't be a Zoom poll. It will be, you can put it in your chat, but we're looking at possibly doing some more research. So I'd be interested in your ideas about if we did research beyond existing business owners and sellers, and we did research on potential business buyers. If that was to happen, what suggestions do you have? What are logical target audiences, groups, places, and or methods to conduct such research? So that's something you can fill in the blank. I mean, you can just put it in the chat, or you can send me an email later, because that's more of a ponderable, right? I'm not asking you to design or research, but meanwhile, I'll just go into some of the resources. We've got a bunch of stuff. We have whether we continue the business course for business owners remains to be seen. Right now it's on hold, but we do have we have over 40 videos in our YouTube channel, which are like 2 to 3 minute videos. So they're useful for you or people in your networks to approach business owners or others in the ecosystem on how to get going on this process. Everything from exit planners to extension people to employee ownership experts to successfully transitioned business owners are on that. So here's the YouTube channel, and that's linked to the main webpage. And we have a nice playlist. Then, like I said, I liked someone's introduction was, I think Lisa was introducing Todd, and she said how he does research and through others. So I would like to be able to offer BST programming, extending it to the other educators in our shop. And I'm still working on that. We've had some classes locally here in Minnesota, but I'd like to continue that. We do have a free class online here for kind of community leaders and business owners. So you can find that on our website. And we're doing networking. We have a BST ecosystem group here in Minnesota. It's been going for about 3 years. And like I said, Char's on the line. I don't know who else is here, but we talk to each other. We learn from each other. We inspire each other. We try things. So, final thing, we have our business retention expansion class. Brandon's going to have a bunch of his team members are going to take our class in September, October. So I got a special coupon code. If anyone's interested, we don't have a class on BST for community and economic developers, but we do have our BRE class. So if anyone's interested in taking that class, we've extended the early bird price. Today's the deadline for early bird, but if you were interested in that class, you got 2 weeks and you use this coupon code early bird special, and that will give you the early bird price. So we'd love to have anyone. You can see a couple people from Oregon took the BRE class this past winter, and they loved it. And they were kind of in the entrepreneurship and placemaking. They're all over the place. BRE was just part of what they were trying to do. But we're glad to have anyone. So with that, I will stop talking and I'll stop sharing my screen, and got 5 minutes left, but I can stay a little bit late. So Todd, if you've been curating any of the questions.
I have, Michael, and not so many questions, but some really good comments that you might want to respond to.
Sure.
Partly too, the chat doesn't always show up when we do these recordings and people go back and look at them. So I'm going to read a few of them to you.
Sure.
One from Tommy Wortman is, it would be interesting to see if people don't reach out to the other resources, primarily because they aren't within the business seller's mental framework of options.
Tommy, that's an outstanding comment. And that's the thing. We don't know what we don't know. And sometimes we know, it's just a thing. There's so many different people. The accountants and attorneys and other business owners are at the top of the ecosystem, but everyone else is part of the ecosystem too. So that's why I did the YouTube, and I'd like to get some more things on the playlist. Like, for instance, I'd never heard of an employee ownership trust until I entered this space about 3 years ago. And by the way, I did Wisconsin and Minnesota, we did a employee ownership roadshow 4 or 5 years ago, 4 years ago. And so I learned some stuff there from Courtney Berner over on your side. So we have to keep learning, but that is, and things keep developing. For instance, employee ownership, there's basically unlimited ways of doing that. I mean, I see Shar is on the screen here. There's 3, like they do worker cooperatives at her shop, and then there's all these other ones. But the whole thing about if you sold stock to your employees, that's the other side of the coin in employee ownership, just as an example.
Yeah. A good comment is from Aaron Aslan. He says he expected to see more concern about the purpose of their org post-succession, such as causing them to avoid wanting to exit in the first place, i.e., I don't know if my company will still carry on without me here. So I think that gets on that emotional side that you had talked about, that I think when you start involving spouses and other parts of the advisor network, that can kind of touch on as well.
You know, I think that kind of brings up, Aaron, the whole idea of whose business is this? And we kind of get into the philosophy of that's none of your business. And I never hear that expression anymore. It's like maybe we're more comfortable with getting into each other's business, or maybe that's part of the problem why we're so polarized. But I don't know. I think Jennifer Hawkins no longer works for us, but she's now with our Minnesota state system. And Jennifer would say, this is a community's business. I mean, this topic, BST is a topic. We need to talk about this. So if a business owner, you have to keep investing in your business. I mean, if you have an obsolete business, if you haven't invested in a business, and that, the only way you're going to find out about whether you're pertinent or not is by talking to people, talking to your customers, talking to your employees, talking to the community. Like, what are people thinking about my business? And do they want to keep forward? And I think a lot of business owners would find out that people value their business and they want to see it succeed, but they will also want them to invest in it and not just coast or ride it out or not being willing to learn new tricks. So, but not talking about it is a problem.
Becky Smith had a question. She says she's starting to do more programs, some very short, like an hour, for business owners. She is wondering what questions are reasonable to ask to show impact and help motivate them to take the next steps.
Oh, that's great. So like that is that's kind of sounds like motivational interviewing, which is kind of a way of asking leading questions. So Perry Mason couldn't, you're leading the witness, but in something like this where you're trying to motivate someone to do something, psychologists and social workers and people like that actually use this thing called motivational interviewing, and because they're trying to, that you need to prepare if you're going to successfully transition yourself and the business to the next owner and leader. So how do you get going on that journey? So that's I think if you looked at our survey instrument, Becky, there's some good questions on there. The survey instrument by itself is an educational tool because we tried to compose, we had 7 pages to use to keep it to a 10-minute survey. There's some pretty good questions on there. It's not perfect. We asked a question about how much time do you spend, and we didn't leave a category for 0. We had a category of 0 to 1, and 62% of the businesses answered that. So does that mean 0, or does it mean 1, or does it mean 5 minutes a week? So could have been a better question. But I take a look at that survey, and I think you're onto the thing that this is a good thing to bring up. And Sean Caskey, I see he's on the line. Here's one of our colleagues from Nebraska Extension, and he's got some nice tools there. Maybe you could put your website in the chat, Sean. So what else?
Well, we are at 1 o'clock, so maybe we can have Lisa kind of wrap things up for the recording, and then we can cover the rest if you're willing to stay on.
Sure. Yep.
All right. Well, before we wrap things up, I do want to thank Michael for being our presenter today on this topic. And Brandon, I think you could probably end the recording, and then if we do have a few people that would like to stay on and have other questions answered, we can do that.